Today we're going to practice painting the top layers of our acrylic painting of a ball, showing visible brushstrokes. We need to have a few things handy. You should have 2 medium round brushes. Make sure you have a palette knife and a piece of cardboard for mixing. Have some newspaper handy for cleaning your brush and your palette knife. You should also have some water and some black and white acrylic paint. To get started, you should already have a tinted ground. Here it's red. You should have an underpainting completed where you've blocked out your light and dark areas with very watered down thin paint. Now it's time to start working with our top layers. When you're working with acrylic paint, you always want to work, just starting out, from dark to light. This allows the light part of the object to appear to come forward into the light. It looks really strange if you paint your darkest colors last. They kind of jump out in a strange way, and it's just because the acrylic paint is so three-dimensional. So make sure that you're always starting out with the darkest area. We're going to focus on the ball first, and the darkest area on the ball would be its shadow core right through here. It's not going to be pitch black, so you want to make sure that you don't go completely black with this. So I'm going to start by mixing. I'm going to take some black paint out, have it handy on my palette, about as much as you can fit on your palette knife. Then I can use my newspaper to wipe the paint off. That comes off really easily and quickly. Next I'm going to grab a whole palette knife load of white paint. I may need to get more at some point, but at this point this should be enough to get me started. Okay, so shadow core, not pitch black. I'm going to grab some of my black paint and move it over, and then I'm going to add a small amount of white to it and see where I get. That looks pretty good. So I'm going to pick up one of my brushes and take some of this dark gray paint, and I'm going to paint it where the shadow core would go. Now, when you're working with acrylic paint, it's nice to paint with the direction of the ball. So you can see I'm kind of curving the brush strokes, and I'm kind of going across this way. That's going to show the curve of the form and make it look more three-dimensional. Now I might take this a little bit further out, so I might do a few lines above and below it. That's going to help make the paint gradually change from that shadow core value to the one that's above and below it. Next up, I want to paint my transition zone right above it and my reflected light. I'm going to start with the reflected light. So I'm going to go back to this dark gray that I have, and I don't have enough to do it, so I'm going to take more black and more white. See if I can mix up the same value. But this time I want to take it just a little bit lighter, so I'm going to add quite a bit of white paint. Now remember, black is stronger than white, so you need to add quite a bit to really get it to change at all. And make sure you have a nice big puddle when you're done. You want to have like that much paint to work with. If you have less than that, it's just not going to work. You're going to run out. Okay, so there's my color. I'm going to take the same brush. I have all of this other paint on it, so you take a second and wipe the extra off onto your newspaper so you don't have too much on there. And then I'm just going to grab this lighter color, and this is the value I want for my reflected light. You can see I'm kind of dragging it a little bit up and across the shadow core, but then I'm going to take it further down and sort of fill it in. Now here at the bottom of the ball, I'm kind of curving it sideways. Again, I'm really trying to show the shape of the ball by the curve of my brush strokes, the direction of the brush strokes. And then carefully dragging it up into the shadow core so I get kind of a gradual transition between the two. I want to do the same thing up here to make my transition zone. So I'm going to take the same color, the same value, and drag it on this side as well. But then I want to quickly change it and make it even lighter. So I will take my palette knife, take some of this, kind of push it to the side, add more white to it. So it's a little bit lighter, so that'll be a good value for my transition. Clean the extra off the brush, grab that lighter value, and then just kind of layer that on top. Remember, you don't want the transition zone to go too far into the light side. You want to have about half of your ball look like it's in the light. There we go. Notice that I'm dragging it across the other one, so they're sort of mixing together. It looks like it's starting to weave together between the two. Next up, I'm going to look at the midtones of the ball. This is where we're getting that direct light. So I want to go a lot lighter for this part. To do that, I'm going to switch brushes. That's why I want to have the two brushes, so I can kind of work back and forth between the two brushes in the transition area. I'm going to mix up a new puddle of paint. I'm going to take most of this white that I have and just that little bit of gray that I have already on the palette knife. So I have something that's quite a bit lighter. And I'm going to use that for the direct light side of the ball. So I'm going to take this, paint it over most of this part of the ball. So I'm doing bigger brush strokes. Being really, I'm not quite crossing. I don't want it to mix too much at this point. So I'm just going to lay down that value, making sure that you can see those brush strokes nice and thick. There we go. Okay, now I'm going to go back to, because I kind of want to weave it on this edge here. So I'm going back with my darker paint, and I can kind of drag it through the lighter stuff. And then I'm going to take the lighter one and drag it across, allowing it to mix just a bit. And that's building up that transition between the two. So this technique is really good for times when you have a lot of texture. So if you're trying to paint something with hair or fur or grass or rock, something with a lot of texture, this works really well. I'm going to go back into my light area now. I want it to get even lighter. I'm just going to grab all of this white that I have, mix it with just a little bit of black that's in my brush just to make it easier to control. I'm going to paint this through. We're getting close to our highlight now. Notice that I'm kind of dragging it through the other paint, so I'm dragging it over the top. That's why you want to work dark to light, because you can layer those lights on top of the darks and sort of integrate them a bit better. Okay, and then for the top part of the ball, the highlight, I want that to be pure white. So I'm actually going to rinse my brush out and just get a dab of pure white paint. And plop that in for my highlight. Sometimes the highlight is blended in, and sometimes it's really stands out like that. Okay, once you have the ball completed, we want to turn our attention to the background. We're going to do the same pattern. We'll start with our darks and then move lighter. You can see that our darkest is going to be the cast shadow, and this should be even darker than our shadow core that we have right here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my black paint, and I want it to be darker than what I had before, but it still shouldn't be completely black. There is some light coming in there, so I'll take this. I'm just going to grab a little bit of this gray so that it's not completely pitch black, but it's pretty darn dark. And we're going to use that for the cast shadow. That looks like that should be pretty good right there. I'm going back to the darker brush that I had before. I have two brushes in play at this point, a darker and a lighter. Lots of artists will work with several brushes at once, so they might have one for a really dark value, one for a medium, one for a lighter, just so that they can switch back and forth easily. Now I painted really carefully along that edge. I went really slowly and carefully so that I could really define that edge that's happening. Once I have that done, I can take my brush strokes horizontally. So I'm telling the viewer this is on a flat surface. This increases that feeling of flatness if you use the brush strokes to show that. Okay, also the background, this is going to be light down here where we have a table, but it's going to be dark up here at the top. So I'm going to use the rest of the paint that I have, mixed up that really dark value, and maybe even more of this black. And I'm just going to start at the top painting horizontal brush strokes, kind of loosely. I'm just going to let just a teeny bit of that red show through, just because I think it adds some interest to the picture. When I get down to the ball, I want to paint carefully around it, so I'm going to take this value and just paint the top part, just the top part, carefully and slowly, just so I can get that really nice separation between the ball and the background. And then right there, that's where I'm going to stop and continue with the dark down to about that level. Okay, next I want it to get lighter, so I'm going to use up all of this that I have left over. So I'm going to take this. I'm layering it into the black, so I'm putting it next to the black. I think I'm going to paint part of the ball too, so I'm going to paint along the ball right here, on that side, on the other side. Next up, horizontal brush strokes, filling in this area, a few further down, same on the other side. But really important, we don't want it to just suddenly jump from this value to the darker one. So I'm going to put dashes above, so that gives it more of an integrated look. Do the same thing on the other side, being careful not to run it into the ball. Okay, now we're going to work with our lighter values, so I'm going to switch to my other brush. And I've run out of white paint, so I'm going to take my palette knife, clean it off on my newspaper. Pick up another scoop of white paint. And I want to start by getting something in between pure white and this gray I've been using, so I'm going to just grab some of this, quickly stir it together. So this is what I'm going to put around here. Again, being careful along the edge of the ball. Same on the other side. Horizontal dashes. Just a few a little bit higher. Same thing on the other side. Layering a few dashes on top of the gray. Next up, I'm just going to go with more white down here at the bottom. So I'll just pick up my white. Keep it horizontal so it looks like it's on a flat surface. A few dashes up just so it blends. Same thing over here. Careful along the edge between the ball and even the cast shadow and on the white area. I'm allowing some of the red to show through just because I like the look of it, how it gives it a little bit of energy and life. And there you go.